This episode of the Duke Basketball Report podcast is brought to you by the boys of Bird Campbell, PA. Bird Campbell means business. Hello, Duke fans, and welcome to episode 115 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. Coming to you, quicker than we would have liked, but unfortunately, this is the job that we have taken. So here we are. I am your host for this season-ending show, Sam Klein. I am joined, as always, by Donald Wine in Washington, D.C. Donald, good evening.
Hey.
And Jason Evans in Atlanta. Good evening.
You know, the nice thing is we can say whatever we want on this edition of the podcast because no one is going to listen to it. No one's going to download it. If I was a huge fan of this, I am a huge fan of this podcast, but if I was a huge fan of this podcast and loved the podcast and listened to every episode, I'd skip this one.
And actually,
why would you want to relive? Why would you want to relive it? Why?
We look at the numbers for the show, and as you might imagine, the downloads increase when Duke is doing well, and they decrease when Duke isn't doing well. And as you can tell by the tone of our voices, and of course because you follow Duke basketball, because you bothered downloading this in the first place, unfortunately, Duke's 2017-2018 season is over. It ended this evening, Sunday night, in Omaha against the Kansas Jayhawks, the number one ranked Kansas Jayhawks in the Midwest region. There were a lot of issues with this game. Jason's favorite stat to point out, the free throw attempts did not actually come into play tonight. I think the big surprise for the Blue Devils.
Field goal attempts, not free throw.
Field goal attempts, excuse me. That's what I meant to say. I'm a little emotional, and I also had a couple beers this afternoon. But the big stats, I think, that did not go in Duke's favor this evening, the rebounding margin, which Kansas won overwhelmingly, the three-point percentage, which was pretty bad for Duke all around, and foul trouble held Wendell Carter out for big chunks of both the first and second half, and ultimately led him to foul out. So I guess I'll start with Jason. Give me your thoughts on the end of Duke's season. And before you start, I should also add that, last season was a disappointment, losing in the second round. I think that Duke team we knew was flawed, even though they had a lot of talent. Injuries kept cropping up for that team. This team, I think we expected to go to the Final Four. We said that when we previewed the NCAA tournament. We said it throughout the season, despite various setbacks. So, Jason, why don't you go ahead and start by reflecting on the game tonight, and maybe we'll get to Duke's season as a whole in a little bit.
Okay. I'm going to start by congratulating the Kansas Jayhawks, who played a great game. There are many people who say that this was the best game of the tournament. It featured 18 lead changes and 13 ties. Duke and Kansas took turns, throwing haymakers at each other. They both played, I thought, very intense. And Kansas is an outstanding team. They're a great team full of guys who played really, really well. And Kansas they're a Final Four team. They're one of the four best teams in the country. So full credit to Kansas. But this sucks because I really, truly in my heart believe that this Duke team was the best team in the country this year. We picked the wrong time to go stone cold from the perimeter. Couldn't hit an outside shot at all. We picked the wrong time to have the bounces go against us the way they did, to have a really bad game rebounding. The rebounding. When we previewed this game, we own them on the boards. It was going to be Kansas's great outside shooting against Duke's dominance on the boards. We got out-rebounded by 15. Kansas killed us on the offensive boards. So we had 22 defensive rebounds. They had 17 offensive rebounds. So when they missed a shot, they had a 44% chance of grabbing the rebound. Who knew that Silvio, or whatever, I can't even pronounce his first name, Mikhailuk, the guy from Ukraine, Who knew that he'd be dominant in the post? With about 10 minutes left in the game, I remember looking at the stats. I could be off by a little bit, but with about 10 minutes left in the game, Mikhailuk had out-rebounded Carter, Bagley, Bolden, and Delorier combined. That is unbelievable. It's terrifying to think about. That said, there are two things I want to talk about. The first one is that I'm just going to say it. The charge call ended the game. The charge call changed the game. It was a terrible call. Wendell Carter was there. I don't think he may have been moving a little tiny bit, but we see charge calls all the time in slow motion and in full motion. Wendell Carter was there. The charge call was a bad call. The referee who made that call, I predict, will not be refereeing anymore in the tournament. I think that when he is evaluated to determine whether or not he deserves to ref a game in the Final Four, they will say, nope, you made the most important call of the game. You fouled out the Duke big man who was playing great at the time. And I think that terrible call completely changed the game. After Carter fouled out, Kansas outscored us by 8 in the final 3 minutes there, other than Grayson Allen's meaningless three-pointer, with 2 seconds left. Who cares? They basically outscored us by 8 for the meaningful chunk of what was left in the game. So that foul call, just so awful. But then the other thing I wanted to mention, and we'll come back, you'll come back to me in a little bit and I'll have more things to talk about. But for the moment, the other thing I want to mention is that I really feel sorry for Grayson Allen, because he was, I think, a half an inch, maybe even less than a half an inch. I mean, if that shot he takes as time is running out in regulation, if that shot is maybe a quarter of an inch, a half an inch at the most different, it goes in the basket. It tried to go in the basket twice. He's half an inch from being a huge hero. And instead, as we look back on this game, it's arguably one of Grayson's poorer games of the season for sure. He struggled a lot in this game and didn't have, I really wanted the kid to have kind of game that would be fitting into a great Duke career. He comes up short of 2,000 points in his career, and he comes up a quarter inch or something like that short of sending us to the Final Four. So I feel for him. I feel really sorry for him. And
in spite of all the great memories he's given us, sadly, this will be sort of part of his legacy going forward, is that he had the opportunity to win the game and send Duke to another Final Four at the end of his senior season, and like you said, was just off the mark on that.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Just 5 seconds. I do think it's worth noting that we clearly, down the stretch in regulation, it was Grayson Allen's ball game. A terrible game to that point, and he started taking the ball hard to the basket, and we said, screw it, if we're going to go with this guy. And he got fouled twice and sunk all throws, and he came within an eyelash of sinking that shot. So we put the game on his shoulders, and he came so close to getting us there, and he gets full credit. I think he should get full credit for doing that.
Absolutely. Let me bring Donald in here. Donald, continue the thread of thoughts.
I want to point out that Donald has said one word so far. Donald has.
Yeah, I'm aware. So I want to hear more from him. Donald is a smart man. He articulates his thoughts well, and he deserves to be heard even today.
So the first thing I'm going to say is that was, Jason, you said it. That was the game of the tournament. It probably should have been in the Final Four. It was that kind of atmosphere. It was that kind of back and forth. It honestly, if you want to make that a movie, that's Rocky 2, except Rocky loses at the end. Like in my go ahead.
I want to interrupt that real quick just to finish off the thought on the quality of that game. Often when Duke is in those big games, they've lost some of them, but over and over again, Duke wins games like that. The 1992 Elite Eight game, right? The 2001 Final Four against Maryland, where Duke came back from like 20 points down at halftime. The 2010 game against Butler in the national championship. The 2015 game against Wisconsin in the national championship. Duke, we are blessed in a lot of ways as Duke fans. One of those is that a lot of those games go Duke's way. Obviously, some of them don't, but but just to be able to play in games like that is pretty cool. Sorry, continue.
Yeah,
with
I agree with that. Again, this was Coach K's 15th Elite Eight, and he's only lost 3 of them. And today was one. I think that sort of each team was taking their shots. At the end of the first half, I felt good about how we played. I didn't feel terrible. I didn't feel great, but I felt like we were in there. We took their shots, they took our shots, and it was a really good game. And that continued the second half. It had some drama. It had some, questionable calls. The Carter fouling out on that. I didn't like that call at all. I don't have to explain why. I think you guys all know. But that sort of game is what the tournament's all about. And it's, very rarely, as you said, very rarely are we on the other end of that. And I think that is, indicative of our success, but it sucks so bad to be the other team. And here's the thing. If any of you were in DC, Mackey's is our watch party venue, and Mackey's is also the venue for Kansas. So that should tell you, just the screams going from one room to the other, back and forth, back and forth. It was incredible. It was an incredible atmosphere. I think wherever anybody was watching, that was the game of the tournament. Now,
it's funny, Donald. Hang on. I need to interrupt you one more time because we had parallel experiences. The Duke Club here in Denver, for a while, was at another bar. We recently switched to a brand new bar that opened it has the same name as another sports bar in town that is a Kansas bar. And it seems like they didn't tell the Kansas fans that they had to stay at the old place. So our bar today was like half and half Duke fans and Kansas fans, all mixed up together. So I hear you. Yeah, no,
it's funny because in our bar, we've had 4 games where the 2 of the 3 we're also a UCLA bar there. And there's only 4 games where we've played one of those teams, and today was one of them. So it was kind of interesting to be in that kind of atmosphere for that. But let me get back to the game. Look, Grayson Allen's shot goes in 99 times out of 100. And the way that it just rolled off, it was so deflating because at that moment you don't
see that happen. You don't,
if you watch the view from above, the ball's in the basket.
The ball's in the basket, and it rolls around, and then all of a sudden, it's almost like it was on a string, and someone just pulled it, and it just kind of fell off the rim. It's one of those things where it was so deflating because you're like that close to going back to the Final Four, and
think about this. It would have been there are the great moments in tourney history. There are a lot of them, and this tournament has seen guys hit desperation 3-pointers for wins and things like that. But because of the importance of the moment, Final Four trip on the line between two of arguably the 2 best programs in college basketball over the past decade or so. Certainly in the conversation. For the moment, it would have been one of the iconic moments in tournament history. And instead, it's not even a half an inch.
Yeah, God. I would say a half a millimeter. That's how close it was. But I will go back to it. Yeah, I will go back to this, and then I'll kick it back to you guys. We can continue this discussion, but I will go back to our 3-point shooting. Before this game, I mentioned that with our inside presence is one thing, but if we can't hit outside jumpers, we won't be able to stretch out their defense, and we won't be able to win this game because we would have trouble, when they pack in the defense. And they did exactly that. We went 7 for 29 from behind the arc. Now, here's the thing. We had a lot of open looks, and they just didn't fall. Their open looks, they fell. They were 13 for 36, and that's a lot of threes, and that's a little less than what their normal average. But it seemed like every time we were able to try and we had a chance to kind of pull away and not really pull away, but put another 5 or 6 points on them, they would hit a key 3. And it was backbreaking when you see that. So I think in the end, no one played well. No one played terribly. I think in the end, it was just these were two heavyweights going at it toe to toe, and somebody had to lose. And unfortunately, it was us.
That pause, it's because none of us know what to say.
No,
yeah, I mean that's where we're at here.
I'll
add that there were some bright spots in this game. Trevon Duval had one of his best games in a while, specifically. But
did he? Hold on a second. Hold on, because I was just going to talk about Duval. Who when Trevon Duval gets the ball in the lane, when he gets the ball going to the basket, he's one of the most dangerous players in the country. He's really impressive. He finished incredibly well today around the bucket. He had a number of really nice passes that led to baskets for us. But I thought he took a couple very ill-advised three-pointers. He took he shot 6 3-pointers in this game, and he's not a good outside shooter. Wait, let me rephrase that. He's not a good outside shooter.
Well, he was 2 for 6, and his teammates Grayson Allen and Gary Trent were 2 for 9 and 2 for 10, respectively. So
I hear you. I agree. I agree. Allen and Trent, the outside shot abandoned them in this game and last game, but I still don't think we want Trevon Duval taking that many 3-pointers. 6 was the most he took in any game all year. And there was one he took that was sort of early in the shot clock, and he was guarded, and it was a little rushed. And I was like, oh, like in the last 5 minutes or so, I was like, oh, that was a bad shot. Like, we did not want that shot. I don't mind as much when he takes ones where he's wide open. And then there was another one he took, I want to say with maybe like a minute 15 left or so. Bagley got the ball in the post. Actually, it may have been even less than that. May have been less than a minute. Bagley got the ball in the post. They went and they doubled. They practically tripled Bagley. He kicked it out to Duval, and Duval took a 3-pointer from the corner. And as soon as it left his hand, we were down 3 at the time. And I get why he wanted to be the hero there. But as soon as it left his hand, I was like, that's not, I don't think that's the shot we wanted there.
I know that we won't ever know this because he's probably leaving the NBA. And we won't get to see him.
He's 100% leaving for the NBA,
right?
Even if he's a second-round draft pick, and he might be a second-round draft pick, but he's leaving.
I maintain that despite his poor free throw or his poor 3-point shooting throughout the season, if you were watching the games and couldn't see whether or not the ball was going in the basket, if you could just see the flow of the games and the way that he was shooting, you would not think that he was a bad shooter. I think we've had guys come in before who were bad shooters, and they look like bad shooters. Trevon Duval never struck me as that. And I think I mentioned that a few times throughout the season. And going forward, I think it'll be interesting. Well, I should follow that last thought up, that if he is as bad of a shooter as he displayed in his percentages this year, if that's sort of what his true talent is, then I'm surprised that he continued to take 3, 4, 5 3-point attempts a game, that Coach K just didn't shut that down, that they didn't retool the offense for it. Because I think that he's got to be smart enough to recognize that he's not making them. The other guys on the team recognize that he's not making them. And certainly the coaching staff knows. So part of me is disappointed that, oh my gosh, why is he still taking these shots? Another part of me thinks he's got it in him. And then what I was going to say is, going forward, I think he's going to play in the NBA for a long time because he's very talented. He's very skilled with the ball. I think he's going to be able to cut down on the turnovers. He's a pretty good defender. He's really long. He moves laterally really well. What I wonder is he going to turn into Rajon Rondo, who everyone thinks is like so mercurial because he can't hit shots and all he can do is drive and kick out. And that's where his strengths lie. Or is he going to turn into more like Kyrie Irving, where he can drive, but he can also shoot? And I think that I wouldn't be surprised.
He's going to be more like Rajon. He's going to be a lot more like Rajon Rondo. Believe me, a lot. He's not going to become a great. I mean, I'll be surprised if he becomes a good 3-point shooter in the NBA.
Is that because of the results or because of the process? Because I think the process is good. I think his shot looks good. I think he often takes them in rhythm. And
Mhm.
it won't, like, there are things I think you can't correct, that the professional coaches and systems can't correct. I think that all of his shooting problems are correctable. Now, I could be wrong about that, and hopefully this podcast exists for 15 more years and we can talk about it. But I don't know at this point if he's actually a bad shooter or if he had a bad season. Luke Kennard had a bad freshman season as a shooter, and then his sophomore year he was great.
Okay,
now
so
I don't know if
I'll tell you how you
Trevon
can help.
Duval. I don't know if Trevon Duval is Luke Kennard, but I don't know.
I want to point out that we're talking about a guy who hit 28% of his three-pointers in the season, 28% of his three-pointers on the season, and 59% of his free throws. The single greatest correlation between college and the pros in terms of being able to become a good three-point shooter in the pros is free throw shooting. And Trevon Duval was one of the poorest, guard, perimeter player, free throw shooters in the country. Hit less than 60% of his free throws. Look, I don't want, I'm not here to turn this into a
no, and I agree with you, and I know about that free.
He's
throw
not going to
indicator
become a good
thing.
three-point shooter. He's
But
not.
remember-
That's why he's going to be drafted late in the first round or early mid-second round. I don't think anyone's taking a first-round pick on him. Actually, I think he's going to be a second rounder because teams will know that he's going to be limited in his ability to shoot.
I'd like to give them benefit of the doubt only for this reason. We've seen a lot of players be terrible either from the line or from behind the arc in college, and they improve steadily in the NBA to a pretty decent shooter. Why is that so? Because once you get signed checks to only shoot a basketball, he is going to have all the time in the world to improve his shot. It's not like college where you have to go to classes and have all these meetings or whatever. It is going to be where he will get paid to take 1 million jumpers between the time he gets drafted and the time he steps foot on the court in the NBA. I think he's going to improve on that. And I think that with that practice, and here's the thing, it's not like he has a hitch in his shot where they have to work out, some fundamental or tweak his shot or anything like that. There's not Markelle Fultz where they have to rebuild it and have all these things about why he's not playing well or playing at all. He has a good shot. He has a good fundamental shot. It's just now about gaining the confidence and getting enough shots up there to be confident in getting them in. That's obviously something that time will tell, but I think he has the tools to improve his shot. And now if he goes to the NBA and he gets drafted, he will have the time and the investment to do so.
I don't want to beleaguer this point because I think we're going to talk about all of these guys, NBA draft prospects, more as the months go on and they declare and start going through workouts and things. So just to leave it there for a little bit, we'll pick back up on that topic at some point later. Were there any other thoughts you guys had about this game, or should we get a little bit more into like looking at the season as a whole? Because I think on the one hand, it's hard for us to think about the season, in the greater scheme right after it ends and right after while we're all emotional about it. But I think there is some value in it, and I would like to hear sort of your reactions to it, knowing that it did just end and that we can think critically about it now. So Donald, the open question to you is,
hold on. Can I just want to wrap up a game thing really quick about this game? Yeah, I apologize, but I started out by saying full props to Kansas. I'm going to extend that to something even more, which is full props to Bill Self, because, and I don't say these words very often, Coach K was outcoached in this game. I really, really think that's true. Kansas executed against our zone way better than we executed against their man-to-man. Kansas had 20 assists on 30 made baskets. They moved the ball around beautifully, and they got the shots they wanted.
And Duke failed to recover on those passes because Kansas was passing around the perimeter, which is what you want to see in the zone defense. They weren't necessarily getting it inside a lot, relative to how some other teams did. I like UNC executed the textbook beat the zone offense, I thought, better than Kansas did when we played them. But Kansas somehow managed to pass the ball around enough, and they passed it around quick enough, and they had enough guys that were scoring threats that Duke was often collapsing onto, say Malik Newman, and all of a sudden Devontae Graham has the ball and he's at the other end of the court and he's making the shot. So that was what was impressive about it, even though they don't have a big man who's able to break the zone by standing at the free throw line. And even though they weren't driving the ball aggressively, because that's not really what they do, and that's what we talked about in the preview, but they certainly executed just by moving it the way that they like to move it and got so many open shots. I'm actually surprised that relative to the number of open shots that they took, that they weren't able to be even more successful against us. But I think you were finishing a thought when I cut you off.
No, that's okay. And I wanted to extend it to the other end of the floor as well. Kansas did an incredible job of containing Marvin Bagley and Wendell Carter. Now, Carter picked up the fouls and the such, so that impacted things for him. But, gentlemen, without looking at the box score, if I told you before the game that Marvin Bagley would take half as many shots as Gary Trent, and he would take less shots, significantly less shots than Grayson Allen and Trevon Duval, that Marvin Bagley, despite playing 44 minutes, would have the fewest shots per minute of anyone on the Duke team. If I told you that, you would be utterly shocked. Kansas did an incredible job of forcing Bagley. They threw double teams at him every single time. They forced him to be uncomfortable. They forced him to take shots he didn't want. They forced him to make passes he didn't want. I mean, this is a guy, he only had 9 field goal attempts. He had 4 offensive rebounds. And every time he got an offensive rebound, he was going up and taking and putting it up. So the number of shots he got in our regular offense was just way, way, way less than usual. And again, it's unbelievable to think about, but Marvin Bagley actually shot the ball less per minute than Marquise Bolden did. Can you believe that? It's unfathomable.
And even as good as, we talk about different ways that Duke, like the different defenses that Duke faces that are trying to stop this juggernaut offense. I don't think anybody did it as well all season as Kansas did. Nobody, it's one thing to contain Bagley, right? What you were saying is that Bagley took those few shots, but Duke has so many other weapons that you would think, well, Bagley's not taking any shots. Duke's just going to make more shots from the perimeter, or they're going to be able to, maybe Bagley's getting doubled when he's farther from the post. So Allen or Duval is going to be able to drive on him. Or Bagley's getting doubled. That means that Carter or Bolden or somebody else down low is going to have more opportunities to get the ball quickly from Bagley and make a quick dunk. None of those things happened reliably. And Kansas was not the best defense we played this year based on the efficiency metrics, but they were the best defense in terms of executing. And I think you're right, Jason, that a lot of the credit for Kansas's victory today is not on Duke losing the game as much as it was. A lot of it was Kansas winning and Bill Self doing an outstanding job coaching, and the Kansas players executing a smart defensive game plan really well. And you can see some of that coaching in all the out of bounds plays. There was an out of bounds play where they inbounded it sort of in the corner on their offensive end, and Javin DeLaurier was the only one in the corner who was there to defend, and he got quickly hit with a screen by the guy who received the inbound ball, who gave the ball right back to the inbounder, who then hit a corner 3. And it was like a textbook Duke play. That's a play that John Shire ran 100 times when he was playing at Duke, where he would inbound the ball quickly, get it right back, and hit a quick 3.
Mm-hmm. The guy who hit that shot was Dante Graham, who may win Player of the Year. I mean, it's
right.
It's not like
that was right. It wasn't like that was some random player. So why was Duke not able to defend simple plays like that? I think you hit on it. I think some of that is on the coaching, and Bill Self figured out a lot of different ways to attack the zone in sort of non-traditional ways that I think that a lot of other teams with coaches who aren't as creative weren't able to figure out. Donald, I wanted to throw it to you, or actually,
Wait.
sorry,
wait. Yeah.
Jason, let me let you finish up, and then I'll let Donald close on the Kansas game.
So I got one more Bagley thing I want to mention to you guys. Like I said, he only took 9 field goal attempts. He was 5 of 9 from the field. If I told you, gentlemen, that 9 field goal attempts, the only times this season that Marvin Bagley took fewer than 9 field goal attempts was the game against Michigan State when he got injured and he only played 10 minutes, and the game against Evansville when we blew them out by 60 plus points. He only took 8 field goal attempts in that game, but he only played 25 minutes. So in a game where Marvin Bagley played 44 minutes, he had his lowest field goal attempt, sort of tied with a few other games, but one of his lowest field goal attempts of the entire season. And I want to add, it was a game where he was being guarded virtually the entire game by a guard. He was being guarded by Mikhailuk, who is 1/10 the athlete that Marvin Bagley is, and doesn't have the size. He probably weighs 40 pounds less than Bagley. He's 6'8". Bagley's 6'11". And I'll bring it back again. Bill Self did an incredible job of taking Marvin Bagley out of this game because he was the best player on the floor, and the best player on the floor didn't win the game for Duke.
So
Donald, why don't you wrap us up here for Kansas?
Yeah, I think in the end, really, I don't think it came down. There was a lot of adjustments that were made on both sides. I think it came down to execution because at the end of the day, like I said, this game was a heavyweight fight and both teams took their shots. And at the end, Kansas executed. I will leave you with this stat. Duke and Kansas both made 30 field goals. Duke had one more field goal attempt, but that's virtually a wash. Free throws, virtually a wash. Where they killed us, and it really wasn't the when they made them or how they made them, but when they made them, it was their 3-point attempts. They made 13 and we made 7. That's 6 more points than we had. That we lost by 4. There's your ball game right there. And I think at the end of the day, they were able to execute on those 3-pointers. It's a strength that we have said, about this team. I think before the game we were chatting online, and Jason, you mentioned that Kansas was the number 1 rated offense against the zone, and I think these adjustments that they made with, passing the ball around and skip passes and stuff like that, that seems to be something that they knew that they had to do. It didn't seem like something that was really adjusted on the fly. They were basically looking for the open man and they were finding him. So I think at the end of the day, execution down the stretch is what was the difference. And, that was an experienced team that we played. We played 4 freshmen who probably have never been in that situation before, or anything like that, because there's nothing like the Elite Eight. There's nothing like a chance to get to the Final Four. So I will give all credit to Kansas. They did a great job, but where they beat us was they executed, and at times we didn't. And that in these games, I said before, it's a game of inches, and it literally was less than an inch that cost us.
All right, let's go to the topic that I tried to introduce earlier, and then we had to pile on a little more, unfortunately. Duke's season as a whole. Donald, your quick impressions that we will probably come back to maybe in a few weeks or months.
Yeah, we said before, I think it was a couple podcasts ago, you asked the question of, would this be a success? What would be a success to you? And I said reaching the Sweet 16 is a successful season. That hasn't changed. We reached the Elite Eight. I thought this was a very successful year. I thought we had a great team that had the tools to win it all, and we just came up short. And, we have had a lot of these games or a lot of these seasons where we've had really, really good teams that have fallen short. And it doesn't take away. This game does not take away from the season's success. We had what I think is probably the greatest, freshman year ever by Marvin Bagley. We had, Gary Trent, like really, really stormed on, especially from behind the arc. Grayson Allen leading this team and sometimes willing them, even when he wasn't really successful on the floor. His leadership was there. I think we saw a lot of great things. Now, do I wish we would have made the Final Four? Absolutely. We were right there. We had it for the taking, and it didn't fall our way. But I think when you look back on the season, you will say, if you really look at it, and not the whole we had all this talent, we should have won a national championship. We have talent every single year. Every year we should win a national championship. That we didn't doesn't detract from how successful I think this season was. And I think this is one that when you look back at it, we had a lot of great things that we got, and it was fun to watch. That's really the most important thing to me. These guys were so fun to watch this year. And I think that's what I'm going to hang on to, at least at this point.
Yeah, I think that I like a lot of your sentiment, but I wonder if I'm going to think about Bagley and Trent and Carter and Duval the way that I think about, say, Tyus Jones or Justice Winslow, who maybe even if they hadn't gotten all the way to the championship, just getting to the Final Four and for the most part, I think living up to all the expectations, not only individually, but as a team. If I'm going to think of the guys this year like that, or if I'm going to think of them more the way that we remember, say, Brandon Ingram or Jabari Parker, I feel like I'm leaning towards the latter at this point. And again, check back with me in a little while, because Marvin Bagley had a season that we will probably never see again. He set all kinds of Duke freshman records, points and rebounds. I think he was second all time in ACC scoring for a freshman. So he was all over the place. He got so good so quickly that we almost started forgetting about how good he was when we were doing recaps. And I think we on this show were just as guilty of that as Duke fans in general may have been. And that's, I don't think we're entirely, we're sort of at fault there, but it's also like he was so good that it was unconscious. At the same time, I said it in the preview that I thought this team needed to get to a Final Four to feel like they achieved something. And I, at the moment, I still feel that way. I think that they were more talented than anybody else in the country this year. And certainly the only teams that you could argue are more talented than Duke were not the teams that they faced along the way to get to where they ended up. I think that Duke is more talented than Kansas. I think that maybe Villanova and Arizona are right there with them. Arizona, of course, had an extremely disappointing season. Villanova's season continues on to the Final Four, but I don't think that Duke lived up to the expectations this year, and I'm not necessarily one to normally, think that way, to be disappointed by it. I'm usually ready to say, oh, look at how great Marvin Bagley was this year. Look at how great Gary Trent was and Wendell Carter. Like they all contributed something well beyond what we expect a freshman, even a really talented freshman, to contribute throughout the season. But I don't think the parts ever really came together. As good as the defense ended up looking at the end of the season, for long stretches, that zone defense was nearly unstoppable until today. And yet it never really felt like they reached the potential that we knew that they had in games, say, early in the season against Michigan State. So Jason, I want to send it to you to finish up this set of thoughts, and then I want to wrap up the show for this week, because I think we're just going to keep talking in circles.
You're not wrong about that. I'm of two minds. A couple weeks ago, I believe Donald asked the question. He asked us what they needed to do to feel like the season was successful. And Sam, I agree with you.
That was me.
It was you that asked it. Okay. And I think Donald said Sweet 16, and you and I both said Final Four. And I stick with that. When we as fans look back on this season, there's going to be no ACC regular season title. There's going to be no ACC tournament title, and there's going to be no Final Four, no national title. That said, I mean, there were some great moments. I mean, the PK 80, the victory over Michigan State, that team that we watched, the zombie Duke team that you told us about. God, that was fun. It was unbelievably fun to watch that. The transformation of this team that happened late in the season when Marvin Bagley got hurt and they suddenly became a team that played zone. that was incredible to watch. It's something we'd never seen before from Coach K. You guys pointed out that several of the freshmen had seasons unlike anything that not just Duke, but the ACC has ever seen before. You talked about, will we remember them the way we remember Jabari Parker and Brandon Ingram, or the way we remember Tyus Jones and and Justice Winslow and the such. I actually think, I think Kyrie Irving may be a good comp for some of these guys, because we have a really fond view of Kyrie Irving because he was so great early on, and then, stuff happened. He got hurt, but then he went to the NBA, and you feel like he's been a great representative of us in the NBA. He's probably one of the 10 best players in the league right now, even though he's currently hurt. And I think that Marvin Bagley is going to be like that. I think we're going to look back on Marvin Bagley's career and go, and Marvin Bagley, I think, is going to at some point be one of the 10 best players in the NBA. And we are going to say, oh, wow, remember how great he was at Duke? Remember all the 30, 4 times the dude went for 30 and 15. I think Wendell Carter has the potential to be, someone who's very, very good in the NBA that we look back on in a fond kind of way. And we'll recall, if it were not for Marvin Bagley, Wendell Carter would have had one of the top 2 or 3 freshman big man seasons in Duke history. So there's a lot to look back on and feel great about. But at the same time, no ACC regular season title, no ACC postseason title, no Final Four, and they were absolutely good enough to do those things. And it just, my final thought, it sucks that a quarter of an inch of a Grayson Allen shot is the difference between what these guys' legacies might be.
I'll tack on to that, and then I want to move to our sort of closing thoughts that we as Duke fans, sometimes on this show and then certainly on the internet, talk about that 1999 Duke team and how talented they were and how they were just so much better than everybody else, and what a shame it was that Elton Brand and Corey Maggette and all those guys didn't win a national championship. I wouldn't be surprised if down the road, once all these guys have had their NBA careers and once we really know who they're going to become as players, I wouldn't be surprised if we look back on 2018 in not exactly the same way, because they weren't so dominant in the regular season as 1999 was, because 1999 went undefeated in conference play and they only lost 1 game through the entire regular season. This team, of course, lost a handful of games. I wouldn't be surprised if we look back on this team similar to that 99 team and just look at the collection of talent and think, man, how did that team not hang any banners in Cameron?
Dude,
we'll see.
Wait. No, hold on.
What?
1999, what? 8 worlds. The 1999 team took souls.
I think this team could have done that.
I agree. So that's the scary thing. I agree. This team could have done that, but they never really did. The 99 team,
true,
the games were over 5-10 minutes into the game. And we didn't have a lot of that this year.
And I'll even say that I remember when we had Shane Battier on the show a few years ago, and he talked about, remember he was telling us about how Coach K would get riled up at them when they would only win games by 5 or 10 points. And I went to, and he, the way he put it was like, oh, we had lost a game or two. And I tried to go back and look through all of the schedules from his 4 years. And I was like, Shane, what you just described, like the outcome, the losing multiple games in a row, like this never happened to you. And he said, oh, well, maybe it was just because we didn't win by 20. I don't remember exactly how the conversation went. Go back and re-listen to old episodes of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. But yeah, I agree. Like I said, it's not going to be exactly that way because this team never reached that level. But there's something about it where it's just like, I know that there was more in this team than we saw. And it's a shame. But hey, next year is a new year. We'll see more great players at Duke. Things will hopefully continue for this program and continue to be elite. But for now, the 2018 season is over. I do want to get final parting shots or players of the week picks from you guys. So for the last time this season, Donald, I want your player of the game for the Elite Eight loss versus Kansas.
My player of the game is going to be Marquise Bolden, because I thought when he was in the game, he really made an impact. And I know he didn't play that much. I know he didn't put up many stats, but there were times where he really, especially on defense, really was there in the clutch, especially when Wendell Carter went out. So a lot of guys had decent games stat wise, but I think Marquise Bolden was a guy that I wish had played a little bit more today because I thought he was stellar at times. So I will give it to him.
All right. Jason, your final player of the game for the season.
It's really difficult for me. I mean, Wendell Carter fouled out. Marvin Bagley only took 9 shots, and I thought he did a terrible job of dealing with the double team, and he got pretty much out-rebounded by a guard who guarded him. Trevon Duval had a great game in terms of taking the ball to the basket, but made some really, really poor decisions in terms of turnovers and some bad shots he took. Gary Trent just missed a lot of shots. So did Grayson Allen, but I'm going to take Grayson Allen as my player of the game because Grayson Allen was a eyelash from being a huge mega hero. I don't care about the other stuff. He came really, really close, and he had a great career. And so the last time I have a chance to pick him as player of the game, I'm picking Grayson as player of the game.
I'm going to disagree with you and take Trey Duval not for having maybe the best game in the absolute sense against the other guys. Like you said, everybody kind of had their ups and downs in this game, but I think we saw if this was a game where Grayson Allen makes that shot and we're going to the Final Four, I would look at Duval's game today and say, look at all the progress he made. And man, I can't wait to see him just clean it up a little bit more next weekend in the Final Four and lead this team to victory. We're not going to see that, of course, but I think there were a lot of great things we saw from Duval today, and hopefully he builds on that stuff as he goes into the draft and continues with his career. So those are the final player of the game picks, and I'll close with parting shots. Jason, I know you've got one for us, so why don't you hit us with a parting shot for today?
I have an incredibly appropriate parting shot. I'm going to urge folks. I'll put the link to this in the description of the podcast, so that folks can follow this link, and also I'll put it on the boards. Folks, you should go. There's a segment that SportsCenter ran this morning that you should go watch. The segment is on, and there's a Duke connection to all this, and it's also appropriate because it's both a sad and a hopeful story, which I think is sort of the story of Duke's season to some extent. Andrew Smith was a 7-foot center for the Butler Bulldogs from 2010 to 2013. He didn't play a lot in 2010 when we faced them in the championship game, but he was a 3-year starter after that. He was a freshman in 2010. He was a 3-year starter after that, an academic All-American, had more than 1,100 points, more than 700 rebounds in his career. Really good player for Butler, was a starter on their team that made the Final Four in 2011. After he literally a week after he graduated from college, he married his longtime girlfriend. The two of them moved to Europe, where he was playing professional basketball. And then Andrew Smith got leukemia, and he died at the age of 25. And as one of his final wishes, he formed a foundation was formed called Project 44. Andrew Smith was number 44 for Butler. And Project 44 is aimed at finding bone marrow matches, people who, register their bone marrow so that they can match someone and fight leukemia. And at Andrew Smith's funeral, everyone there was asked to sign up to be part of Project 44 and see if they could be a bone marrow match for someone. And just a short time ago, Chase Stegall, who you may remember, who was also a player for Butler, he was a guard on that team. He played more than Andrew Smith did against us. Chase Stegall ended up being a match for a 4-year-old kid from Ohio named Deegan Scott. And they did the bone marrow transplant, and Deegan Scott is going to live. He's going to see his 5th, 6th, and 7th birthday and beyond because of Project 44 and because of what Andrew Smith wanted to have happen. They call it Project 44, by the way, both for Andrew's number at Butler and also because their goal is to save 44 lives. And thanks to Chase Stegall, they have saved 1, and they have 43 yet to go. It's an incredibly moving piece that was on SportsCenter, and Folks, just go watch it. And if you're so inclined, maybe you'll be moved to try and save a life yourself.
That was a great story, Jason. Thanks for sharing it with us. Donald, your parting shot.
I just want to give kudos to the Duke women's basketball team. They took on UConn in the Sweet 16 yesterday, and they only lost by 13, which is a remarkable stat because UConn is a juggernaut right now. But it was one of those games where they started out and they were hanging with them, and then they hit, UConn had one of their stretches where they pulled away and never looked back, but Duke kept fighting. They kept getting back, and they eventually lost, but they made it probably a game that Gino Auriemma would was probably yelling at his team after the game because they fought them quite tough. So congratulations on a good season to the Duke women. It now sucks that both of our teams are out, but just wanted to give them a kudos on a wonderful season.
And I will finish this show by thanking our listeners once again. This has now been 4 seasons that we've done this program pretty much every week during basketball season and regularly, but not all the time in the off season. We are continuing to do it. And not that we couldn't do it without you, because I think when we started it, we didn't know that anybody was going to listen. But it certainly helps that we know that there are folks out there who listen to the show, who email us, who get excited about downloading and interacting with us via that email address or on the forums or on Twitter, wherever it may be. So my thanks to Donald and to Jason for being along for this ride with me. And my thanks, of course, to all the listeners who continue to download, who subscribe, who leave us ratings, all that stuff. It means a lot to us. It's obviously it never stops. The season is over now, but we'll be back again soon to talk about draft time, and we'll be talking about the team for next year. And I know there's still some recruiting to go. So
hey, by the way, I'm going to be seeing the McDonald's All-American practices, and I'll be talking to the Duke recruits at the McDonald's All-American game next week. And we'll get those interviews out for folks. So yeah, we're going to, the coverage never ends. Yeah,
it never ends, but it's always a good time at the end of the season to say thank you again to you guys for being with me, and to all the folks who listen. We really appreciate it. We're going to keep going. We're going to keep the show going as it is, and hopefully we continue to make it better. So once again, as always, email us if you've got anything to say, dbrpodcast@gmail.com. Subscribe, tell your friends, rate us, give us 5-star reviews, all the good stuff that you hear from all your favorite podcasts. So hopefully we're at the top of that list. And we'll continue talking about Duke basketball and maybe a little Duke football and maybe some other stuff as long as you are willing to listen. So for the last time for the 2017-2018 basketball season, although not for the last time ever, thank you for tuning in to episode 115 of the Duke Basketball Report. For Jason Evans and for Donald Wine, I'm Sam Klein. We'll talk to you again soon. Duke Band, take us home.